Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Great to have you with us. My name is Matt Childers, and it's a pleasure to have you with us on this virtual town hall series. Allen Lima Leadership presents Leaders Over Lunch. Very pleased to have members of the current Allen Lima Leadership Class 2021, all alumni, our stakeholders, and many friends of all. We're pleased to have so many of you be with us today on this February 24th, 2021. Many of you know that the pillars of Allen Lima Leadership are all about leadership, community awareness, serving our community. And today's Leaders Over Lunch hopefully will educate, inform, and lead to a great discussion. Before I introduce our featured presenter and author, Katherine Gehl, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rob Alexander. Rob is a professor of political science at Ohio Northern University and the founding director of the Institute for Civics and Public Policy. Frequent op-ed contributor, Professor Alexander's work has been published in USA Today, CNN.com, The Hill, and many others. Dr. Alexander is often called upon by the media, and his analysis appeared in hundreds of print and television outlets. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Rob Alexander and his political science class, the Superstars, over at Ohio Northern University. So, welcome.
I feel the love. Wow. I'll keep it short because I think Katherine's got some fantastic things to say. I really do want to thank Matt, my good friend, for inviting myself as well as our class at Ohio Northern University. My Intro to American Politics class is joining us. And we've spent a good amount of time in the first part of the semester talking about the events of January 6th, the bitter partisanship that we have seen in recent years, and perhaps some ways to overcome that. So this is just such a perfect dovetail to that class. There's a lot of really fascinating work going on by political scientists right now in dealing with issues of representation and trying to bring down the temperature, the polarization that is occurring. And Ms. Gehl, she talks a lot about that in her book, which is great. Issues like ranked choice voting and many other things. So I can't wait. I'm really excited to hear from her as well. So that's it for me. And I want to invite any of the students that we have here to be prepared to ask any questions along the way.
That's right. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Anyone that would like to ask questions, if you just use your chat feature on the Zoom, we can get to those following the presentation. So now our featured presenter, and I must say that I stumbled upon Katherine because I'm a C-SPAN junkie, and many of you may not be a C-SPAN junkie, but it helps me fall asleep at night. And I saw Katherine one Sunday evening in August on Q&A, and that did not put me to sleep. It actually made me watch it over and over again. I actually watched it 3 or 4 times because I was so engaged in it. I'm a political science major. I'm a history buff. And Katherine Gehl, who's the founder of the Institute for Political Innovation, a nonpartisan nonprofit founded in 2020 to catalyze modern political change in America. Katherine is the originator of the politics industry theory and the author of The Politics Industry: How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy, which she co-authored with Harvard Business School Professor Michael Porter. A veteran of the public and private sectors, Katherine is the former president and CEO of Gehl Foods, a $250 million high-tech food manufacturing company based in Wisconsin that she sold in 2015. Katherine graduated from the University of Notre Dame, go Irish, holds an MA in education from Catholic University, and she also earned an MBA from Northwestern's prestigious University Kellogg School of Management. Let's give a big warm welcome to Katherine Gehl.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Rob. Thanks to all of you. I'm actually in a really fantastic mood. And part of it is to talk to you guys. And I was thinking, okay, why am I so happy about this? 3 reasons. One, because when I get to the end of my theory, we actually get to talk about action in Ohio, because there is a nascent movement to make the changes that we'll talk about in the Wouldn't This Be Nice section. And it isn't until the first time I ever had a chance to talk to groups in a state where this was really happening outside of my own state, outside of Wisconsin. The first time I had that chance was in January of last year. And so now it's happening more and more that when I get to speak to groups of people, there's an opportunity to not say, boy, what a great idea, I hope someone does that, but instead to decide, oh, we are doing that in my state and I can get engaged. So just know that we'll talk about that at the end and think about that as we're going through. The second thing is I did, years ago, I worked for Mayor Daley in Chicago, and I was part of a 10-month leadership cohort like this called Leadership Greater Chicago. And it was transformational. And, you know, we have these, I don't know how many hundreds of alumni or 1,000 we have, but it's a big part of the fabric of Chicago. You know, like Michelle Obama was a leadership Greater Chicago fellow. President Obama, then state senator, I actually never participated, but so many people in Chicago have done so. So I just love these groups. I think you guys make a huge difference if my view of what's happened in Chicago is any indication. And then the last reason I'm super happy to talk to you about is because even though I spent time in the public sector and now I work full time on political innovation, I really am a business person. I know there are a lot of business people on this call. And I have used, you know, this theory of politics industry comes from thinking about competition as someone who has been in the for-profit sector for a long time, which will make sense to you as I go through this. So again, I'm in a good mood. And I also want to, before we start, thank those of you who have your cameras on. I totally understand people have to be having lunch, all of that. But boy, oh boy, is it nice to be looking at some faces, Michelle, Adam, Shane, Tyler, Melissa, Bethany, instead of like talking to maybe myself and Matt and Rob, okay? So, even though I want to talk to Matt and Rob. Okay, so great. Here's the thing. I ran Gehl Foods. This is a $250 million food company I had in Wisconsin. Yes, it's a Wisconsin company. We did make cheese, which makes people happy for some reason. So where politics industry came from is that at the same time as I was running Gehl Foods, I was also deeply involved in politics as a citizen. And I was becoming more and more and more frustrated. So fast forward to a time when I was going through my business strategy. And I was working actually with Michael Porter of Harvard Business School, who had really invented modern corporate strategy. And I was using classic 5 forces tools to figure out, I mean, fancy things, but fundamentally, how could I sell more cheese and grow my business, right? So as I'm doing this analysis, I had another piece of my head that was relating all of the same concepts to politics. And it brought forward a couple of key questions, which lead me to be talking to you today. It was these two things. Essentially, I could see, of course, as I'm doing this strategy, that in order for me to be successful, I needed my customers to be happy. If they like my cheese, I sell more cheese. You know, that's how it works. Kind of simple. So why are the players in the politics industry doing so well when their customers are so fundamentally and reasonably universally unhappy? How does that happen? We could never do that. The second question was, now I knew if I didn't make my customers happy, and yet there was money to be made in our industry, that there would be new competitors coming in to take that business because they would see a market opportunity and they would grab it. So given that the customers in politics are so unhappy, meaning the citizens are the customers and the voters are the customers, and they're so unhappy, how can we never see any new competitors? How could that be possible? And those, you know, and those questions really led me to this very clear realization that unlike any industry I've ever worked in the politics industry, we don't have innovation. We don't really get the results we need, and there's no accountability for not getting those results. The best of what healthy competition delivers in any well-regulated, functioning for-profit industry. It's the best of what I would like to call free market politics, you know, something that would give us innovation, results, and accountability. And as a result, I really started searching for answers that went beyond who could be the next great change candidate or what should be the policies. And eventually it became clear to me not only what some of those answers were as to what had gone wrong, but also, most importantly, what we could do to change that. So I'm going to start with the core tenet now of what has come to be called politics industry theory. And that is, I would say, let's start with the one thing that people across the country, even today, pretty much universally agree on. And that is that Washington is broken. We say it all the time, but it turns out that this idea actually represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem, because the truth is that Washington isn't broken, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. Our confusion is that most of us have assumed that Washington, D.C., the system, the politics industry, was designed to serve us, the citizens, the voters, the public interest. But in fact, most of the rules, norms, practices that create the key incentives in the industry have been created or optimized over time by and for the benefit of private gain-seeking organizations, which are our major political parties and all of their industry allies, all of the organizations making money off of the business of politics. I call this larger set the political industrial complex. And you sort of know this intuitively. The political industrial complex is thriving. It's bigger, more powerful, more money, more jobs than ever. And they're thriving even as their citizens have never been more dissatisfied. So it turns out we don't have as much a politician problem or a policy problem, even though the drama certainly makes us think we do, and there's some of that, no question. But the real key is to understand we have a systems problem, a problem with the rules of the game in this politics industry. And our book is full of examples of these, behind the scenes rules, but I'm going to share just one quick example with you to get a sense of how much is behind the scenes that we don't really know about that actually ends up mattering a great deal. So this is an example from actually over 10 years ago. So back in 2009, Joe Biden becomes vice president. His Senate seat is open in Delaware. Everybody in Delaware, I am told, knew who was going to be the next senator from the state of Delaware. It was to be preordained. Mike Castle, he was a multiple-term governor, multiple-term congressman, the most popular politician in the state. And he was, measuring the drapes, as my friend Mickey Edwards used to say, in his Senate office. In any case, he ran in his Republican primary in 2010, and he lost. Now, this was totally shocking, but, theoretically not a huge problem, because that's just the primary. So any, one of you would probably advise him, well, no problem. Everybody knows you in this state. Just go run as an independent on the general election ballot in November, and you will absolutely win. And that would have made great sense, and he would have won. But there was a problem for Senator Mike, for the person we've never heard of now as Senator Mike Castle, and that's because Delaware has a law, and it's called the sore loser law. And what this says is if you lose your party's primary, Democrat or Republican, you are not allowed to have your name on the general election ballot in November, regardless of what the citizens of your state want. So effectively, this allows these private political parties to control the choices that we have in November. And this really begs the rational question of how many states have a crazy, pretty undemocratic sounding law like this? And the answer is 44. And I didn't check it out today as to what, I'm going to just guess that Ohio is one of those, as in you are sitting in one today. So some of you guys are mostly pretty young, but some of you who are more my age would remember when Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman lost his party primary in Connecticut to someone who, ran to his more extreme side. But he then ran as an independent in the general election in November and got elected, proving that that's who the people in the state of Connecticut wanted. But the only reason he could do that is because Connecticut was one of then only 4 states that didn't have a sore loser law. So that gets a little bit at the rules and also the power of the party primary. There are some very important things we should know about party primaries. Most elections today for federal office are really decided in the primary, over 80% of elections. And in the primary, that's where candidates are polled further to the right and further to the left than voters as a whole really want. But the real problem is that the influence of the party primary goes far beyond determining who gets elected. Because the real problem is it determines what those winners do when they're governing. Party primaries are the single greatest structural contributor to the gridlock and dysfunction that we see in Washington, D.C. So imagine yourself as a federal politician. It's not just what you have to say to get elected through that primary. It's now, once you're in office and you have an opportunity to consider a bipartisan consensus bill on one of our nation's biggest problems, let's say, immigration, debt, healthcare, infrastructure. What are the operative questions that you ask yourself? Is this a good idea? Is this the right policy for the country? Is this what the majority of my constituents want? But it's none of those questions. The question you ask is, will I win my next party primary if I vote yes for this? And if the answer to that is no, and on virtually all the big issues, the complex problems, the answer is almost always no on both sides, then the rational incentive to get reelected dictates that you vote no. Because if you vote yes, you're going to have a primary challenger, usually further to your right or further to your left. Party primaries create an eye of the needle, that proverbial eye of the needle, that's so small that no problem-solving politician can pass through it. And we can start to understand, therefore, why so little gets done in DC, because party primaries forbid the two sides from working together. And now pay attention, to the news all the time. The whole talk will be about how President Trump is going to primary Republicans who don't agree with him. The talk is that Bernie Democrats are going to primary people who aren't progressive enough and force Biden further to the left. And I'm not making a value judgment for the purpose of this conversation about any of those ideological values. What I'm saying is it is pushing everybody, so far apart you can't see them on this little Zoom screen, which makes a problem. Today, there's virtually no intersection between Congress acting in the public interest and the likelihood that they will get reelected. These are separate things. In other words, if America's elected representatives do their jobs the way we need them to, they're likely to lose those jobs. And that is a crazy design of a system. But fortunately, we can fix this. Our system is missing 2 critical dimensions of any functioning industry or organization. We don't get results, and there's no accountability for that. We don't get results because of the party primary. I mean, there are other factors, but again, think structure, system. The main thing is we don't get results because of the party primary. And then the other reason we don't get results is because there's no accountability for not getting them. And there's zero accountability because the customer, the voter, only has 2 choices. So the only thing either party has to do to win is to convince the average voter to choose them as the lesser of 2 evils, or to choose them because at least that party says, therefore, what that voter believes. But what the parties don't have to do in this duopoly is to deliver the results, because no matter how disappointed you are, you still likely prefer what your side says, therefore. than what the one other choice says therefore. And this problem with accountability can also be attributed to our election rules, which create this which create a huge barrier to any new competitors coming in. So in the US, we use something called plurality voting. So when our founders created the first modern democracy, they had to pick, well, how should we know who wins? And they copied countryside elections in Britain. And the answer is who wins is the person who has the most votes. Now that sounds so logical, but it actually turns out that it's a real problem. Because plurality voting, which means the person with most votes wins, means that in any election of more than 2 candidates, someone can win without a true majority, without 51% support. So for example, someone can win in a 3-way race with only 34% support, meaning that the other 2 each got 33, 66% there. So that means 66% of voters preferred someone else, but the winner got 34%. Now that might not seem totally fair or representative, but by far the most important problem with this plurality voting is that it eliminates any new competition which might push the existing players to want to care more about solving problems and making their customers happy. And that's because plurality voting creates what we call the spoiler effect or the wasted vote effect. So let me explain those. Sometimes we don't vote for the candidate we really want because we're afraid that we'll waste our vote or that we will accidentally sort of help elect the candidate we like the least. For example, if you think back to the 2016 presidential race, voters who liked the Green Party candidate Jill Stein were told, oh, whatever you do, don't actually vote for her, even though this is a democracy. Don't vote for Jill Stein because she's never going to win. She'll just spoil the election for Hillary, take votes away from Hillary, and you'll inadvertently help elect Donald Trump. So she's a spoiler. And if you're on the right and you want to vote for Libertarian Gary Johnson, you're told, oh my God, don't vote for the guy. How crazy would that be? Because you'll just, take votes away from Trump and help elect Hillary. And the real key, though, is to understand that the spoiler problem is why most candidates, most potential Jill Steins or Gary Johnsons never even run in the first place because they know they can't overcome that spoiler problem. Some of you might remember that in the spring of 2019, the founder and former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, considered running for president as an independent. But he had been a Democrat his whole life, but he wanted to be sort of in the centrist Democrat lane. And he was hounded out of the race by Democrats because they believed that he would, spoil the election for the eventual Democratic nominee. And here's the thing, those Democrats were probably quite right. But now let's look at it as a system, not whether we wanted Howard out or in or anything. It doesn't matter for the purpose of this conversation whether any of us think Howard Schultz would have made the best president or the worst president. We can still understand that there's something fundamentally wrong with a system where having more talented competitors is somehow bad. If you think about it, politics is the only industry where we are all regularly told that less competition is better for the customer. But that shouldn't have to be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way because the two problems are structural, party primaries and plurality voting, and we can change them. They are not in the Constitution. Actually, let's see. Okay, so this is my pocket Constitution. Believe me, almost everything in the politics industry isn't in here. So it's all optional, but what is in here is Article 1, and Article 1 gives all the states the power to change these rules on their own, individually. So the secret is now that the rules have to be changed, and how we want to change them is to create something called Final Five voting. And that is the combination of top 5 open primaries and instant runoff voting in general elections. We call this combination the two changes final five voting. And with final five voting, the structural problem illustrated by the Venn diagram that I showed you at the beginning changes. I have to look at something here for a moment. Oh, yes. Okay. So, sorry, I got a little mixed up for a moment. So let me explain these two changes to you. First of all, party primaries, let's just get rid of them. Okay, we eliminate them and we replace them with an open top five primary, which means that when you go to vote in the primary, you don't pick the Democrat ballot or the Republican ballot. You don't have to be registered as a Republican or Democrat. You vote in one election on primary day. Everybody running, regardless of party, is on the same ballot. And you pick your favorite, the polls close, add up the results. The top five finishers now advance to the general election. So not one Democrat, one Republican, the top five people, regardless of party. And now the election has not been decided in the primary. Now we're going to have a dynamic and diverse competition of ideas, visions, and personalities between the primary and the general. And then we make a second change in the general, which is now when you go to vote in the general, you have these five choices that you've got to know during this period, and you get to rank them. The way we do everything in life, as in, this is my absolute favorite candidate. I really hope that person wins. And if it's Jill Stein, you get to really hope Jill Stein wins. But then my second choice is Hillary. I mean, I'd be pretty happy with her. And then all the way down to, you know, your last choice, which is over my dead body, do I want that person to win? So you can rank as many or as few as you want. Then the polls close and we use instant runoff voting. Because what we don't want to do is have five candidates and now let one of them win with 21%, right? That would be goofy. Can't have someone win by the vote splitting five ways. So the polls close, we use instant runoff voting. You add up all the first place votes, the first rankings. And if one of those five candidates has a true majority over 50%, they win. The election's over. But if nobody of the five got support from the majority of the people who voted, then you eliminate the candidate who came in last place. You say, sorry, you're out. And voters who had selected that candidate who now lost have their vote transferred to their next choice, who's still in the race. Then you run the totals again, you look for someone with over 50% support, and you continue eliminating the bottom person until you find who has the majority support. It's exactly like a series of runoff elections, except you cast all your votes at once instead of having to come back physically for another election, which people basically never want to do. So with final five voting, this then changes the incentive that we talk about that I showed you in the Venn diagram. So Sylvia, if you could bring up the next Venn diagram. With final five voting, we have now created a connection between acting in the public interest and the likelihood of getting reelected. So go back and imagine yourself as that. You can be the exact same public official, the exact same senator who was elected under our current system and had to vote no on the bipartisan consensus bill on immigration because you knew you'd lose your primary. So now that same person says, behind closed doors, we've all known for 2 decades that these are the basic outlines of the next step immigration solution. It isn't exactly what I would prefer, what my ideology prefers, but it's the way forward. And I won't lose my primary. I'll be in the top 5. I'm an incumbent, I'm great. I mean, I'll be in the top 5. And then in the general election, I can make my case to the much greater turnout general electorate and make my case to people in my ideology and outside of them with a combination of first and second place votes, third place votes, perhaps I will be able to craft a win. So the point of final five voting is much less about changing who wins, although indeed eventually it does that if people don't get results. The point is to change what the winners are incented to do and on whose behalf they're incented to do it. And this makes them answerable to their entire district instead of just a narrow swath of primary voters and special interests. So they'll be in this position to sort of say, I now have the political freedom to innovate, to reach across the aisle whenever it's helpful, and to come up with real solutions to our problems and new opportunities for progress. And if I don't do that as this senator or representative, you know what? For the first time, I'll be guaranteed new and healthy competition in the next election, because there won't be any reason to hound the new competition out of the race, because there's no more spoilers and no more wasted votes. Final five voting gives voters more choice, more voice, and delivers the best of what healthy competition delivers in any industry, which I said at the beginning. We get innovation, we get results, and we have accountability for that. Now, before you think that I'm making a completely naive overpromise of like some crazy utopia where it's all kumbaya, I want to clarify that I'm definitely not. I agree totally with Winston Churchill. You guys will remember, I mean, not that we were there, but that you may recall that we've heard he said, democracy is the worst form of government out there, except when compared to all the others. Democracy is precious, but it's also messy and hard. And what we have now is messy, hard, and really bad results. With final five voting, we will have messy, hard, and some good results to show for all of that and to protect this precious democracy of ours. And perhaps the most amazing point of this whole thing is, and this gets to why I was excited to talk to you guys, because there's actually action. Final five voting is achievable. We actually have proof. In 2017, I released my first written work on this topic through Harvard Business School, and my co-author was Michael Porter. And that report, and it was called Why Competition in Politics is Failing Democracy. And the report, made its way to Alaska, and there was a man there named Scott Kendall, and he'd been deeply involved in politics. He read it, and he decided to create a ballot initiative in Alaska for Final Four voting. I'm Final Five voting now, but my first report in 2017 was Final Four, okay? Close enough. So he created a ballot initiative for Final Four voting, and this past year in November 2020, Alaskans passed Final Four voting. They now have the only two senators in the country who cannot be threatened with a party primary, as in you do this here or this here. They happen to be both Republicans. One of them is Senator Lisa Murkowski. And we need to bring that kind of freedom, which allows everybody to keep their ideologies. I'm for parties, I'm for ideologies, I'm for passion about issues and the right solution. But then I'm for coming together and solving things in this diverse country with complex problems with trade-offs. So now the floodgates, I hope, and we are working for, I have two of my colleagues on this call with us, is that we will have more ballot initiatives and more legislative efforts. And there is, as I said, a nascent effort now in Ohio. You guys are a ballot initiative state. Only half the states can make this change through ballot initiatives. In other states like Wisconsin, my effort in Wisconsin is for a legislative change, and that is a different animal entirely. So you guys could hope to, in 2022, be able to vote yes on your ballot for Final Five voting in Ohio, assuming you like what I'm proposing, which means that when we get into Q&A, we can talk about how you could get in touch with us so that we could put you together with that campaign, because that's how it happens. The citizens decide they want to run this. And then the second thing so I'm going to want you guys to follow up with us if you like what we're talking about. You can do anything from join the campaign, help lead the campaign, to donate to the campaign, to tell your friends all about the campaign. The second thing, I will make a request to you. Now I have to sell all the time because it's so important to me. Is if you guys like what I said today, could you share my TED Talk? And I think maybe, Matt, we could send out my TED Talk and a link so that other people can learn about, my colleague Sylvie Doppel put it in the chat, to share it with people about this message that it doesn't have to be this way. And by the way, this works really well because it's not partisan. It's not a Trojan horse for, some other agenda. So in closing, before we do Q&A, I want to just talk briefly about another one of our founders. So Thomas Jefferson is said to have said, fact checkers say it didn't really happen, but it's a pretty great quote. In America, we don't have government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participate. And almost my entire life, I thought that meant that I had to participate by voting, maybe by actively supporting some candidate's campaign. But it also means that we have to participate in the design of the rules of the game. Because where did I put my Constitution? They gave us this, and the rest of it we've been making up. And if the rules we're making are causing behavior that's not helpful, we have to change them. Our country was founded on what I think of as the greatest political innovation of modern times. And it turns out that once again, political innovation is the key to our future. So we are at my organization, Institute for Political Innovation, incubating campaigns like this around the country. And let's talk about what's happening in Ohio. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Big round of applause for Katherine. Thank you very much. I wanted to welcome back Dr. Rob Alexander from Ohio Northern University back into the conversation. And Rob, I would ask you to have the first question.
Well, I want to thank Katherine for such a wonderful explanation. And it's funny as she was kind of going through, I'm going Alaska, and that's us, right? So that, and to think about Lisa Murkowski, it's interesting, she is seen as one of the more independent actors in the United States Senate, looking to put her own constituents and her own thoughts necessarily above her party, and that was brought up during this last impeachment about how look, go ahead and try and primary her. Alaska has now the top 4 primary process. So and those that have been really paying attention would see that she ran as an independent after being defeated in her primary last time around. So, but she has a lot of name recognition and whatnot in the state. So. But it's a really important thing. One of the things I wanted to bring up is I think that this is certainly a reform, and there is a pretty strong reform mindset that is coursing through the country right now. As I mentioned kind of at the outset, that a lot of political scientists are putting ranked choice voting, and you're seeing that ranked choice voting is occurring at local levels throughout the country. And we're seeing it in Maine. We're seeing in Alaska. I think Colorado recently looked at it as well. And frankly, I would kind of put it out there in the political science literature as saying that it's a much better alternative than kind of the quick and dirty term limits argument that's often put out there, which is kind of runs counter to a lot of people's thinking. But with term limits, the folks that are not term limited are political parties and special interests. They are not term limited from things like that. The notion with ranked choice voting is that you are trying to get politicians to reach out to new constituencies. Where do you see, what were the biggest obstacles that they faced in Alaska in trying to get this initiative passed?
So, the obstacles are going to be somewhat unique to the state in terms of the constituencies you have to go through, but they come in various categories that are similar. First of all, there is just resistance to change. especially on, even though this is a completely, like what I'm talking about, and in Alaska, it's completely nonpartisan, doesn't help one side more than the other, helps the customers of all the sides, change, there's more resistance to change in general on the conservative side. The second area is that people really try to protect the way that they've built power up till now. And the fact is that dynamic competition is dynamic. One of the reasons there's so much money in our politics right now, self-interested special interest money in politics, is because the return on investment, the ROI of that money is really great. Because you know who's going to win. After the primary, in 80% of the districts, oh, that's a red district. Look at who won the Republican primary. They're for sure winning. And the parties do a lot to make sure those primaries are sort of decided before the voters even have a say, in a sense. So you know that if you invest money in that candidate, that they're going to be there to have your interests at heart. And I'm not saying it's always exactly that way, but once you have dynamic competition, you don't pick the winners in the primary. Nobody gets to pick them except the public in the general election. And so it increases uncertainty, which is healthy competition. And that's really good for customers. It's just not as good for people who have figured out how to get their way, and have undue influence essentially in the current system. So I always tell people a lot of people, Dr. Alexander, want term limits, but a lot of people also want limits on campaign finance. And the point is, first of all, you can't necessarily get limits on campaign finance without a constitutional amendment. And so therefore, that's not super helpful because we're not going to get those. But the other thing is, the best way to get self-interested money out of politics is just to reduce the return on investment that it's getting, because people don't waste their money. They put money in where they get their return. And final five voting and dynamic competition, healthy competition will do that. So I think that Alaska put together a coalition where they had support from conservatives, independents, and Democrats. And they had the least support from conservatives, but it was a bipartisan victory, tripartisan really. They have more independents than Democrats or Republicans in the end. And that we want to get that in every state. And we want to figure out a way to much more, appeal to conservatives with this change as well. Could I quickly bring up something though? I want to bring up this Venn diagram, powerful and achievable, Sylvie, because I want to get at something you were pointing out, Dr. Alexander, that there's a lot of movement for ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting is essentially what I described to you, but I called it instant runoff voting because I was describing also how we determine the winner. Final five voting is the combination of changing the party primary to the top five primary plus using the ranked choice voting instant runoff in the general election. It is very different in effect on the system than ranked choice voting on its own, which is why our institute will not be running any RCV alone initiatives. I would vote for them. I'm for them. I'm not against them, but they're not powerful enough to alter fundamentally enough the incentives in Washington, D.C. Because remember, I said that the biggest reason we don't get results is because people can't win their party primaries. That doesn't change even if you put ranked choice voting in the primary. You still have an eye of the needle where one Democrat and one Republican only can win, and you can be primaried in such a low turnout election. Ranked choice voting doesn't help you enough. So we have to change them both. And that would be the definition of something powerful, because again, ranked choice voting could change who wins. It just wouldn't change the winner's behavior enough. And that's really what we need, is change to behavior. And final five voting, the combination does that. The second thing that really matters is achievability when we're choosing what we all want to invest in. So just like I said, you might think campaign finance is super powerful, and we could argue about that, let's say, but the fact is it's not achievable because, it takes a constitutional amendment. The same thing is, let's say you still think, regardless of what Dr. Alexander said, that term limits is what we should have. But guess what? That also takes a constitutional amendment for federal office. So that's also not achievable. Doesn't mean it can't be achieved in, 20 years or something, but let's invest where we can make a difference right now. And here's what we need to invest in. We need to invest in things that are powerful enough to make a difference. Here's what I mean by that. I think, I'm going to see if I can get in my Zoom screen. I think we're drowning. This is the water over our head as citizens. And if we reform things that are good and helpful, and they lower the water over our heads, like we change gerrymandering, which is good and helpful, but it lowers the water. Do I look like I am still dead? Yes. And we do other proper and good and very important things like making access to voting easier and all of that. That's a very good thing, but with only 2 choices and still party primaries, even if every single person voted, the incentives would be the same. So we're still dead. What we have to find is something that gets us to at least here. I need the water to be here. And then once the water is here, then all those other things also start to really make a difference. But in my view, and the theory of politics industry and the need for healthy competition, the only thing that gets us to at least here is changing how we vote, getting rid of party primaries and getting rid of plurality voting. And that's why I'm all in for this.
Okay, Dr. Alexander, good question. I've got some questions from your class. We've got about, since we started a little late, we've got about 15 minutes left. This from Casey Knippen. In case I have to leave for class, oh, okay, I got you. Ask her this. Hopefully it makes sense. From growing up in a small town, people have strong beliefs on certain parties. How does one go about helping find common ground between parties? From a student at Ohio Northern University.
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. We want to be really real and really have a grip on what is so in the world. So we want to be ruthlessly practical, which is to say, there is not a lever we can push that has people, sort of find a kumbaya, common ground, when all the incentives of keeping jobs and making money and everything and winning elections in the politics industry is to push people apart. Like, I'll just give you another example. What is the best way to win an election? It's to run negative ads in the existing rules. Under the new rules of Final Five voting, there'd be a penalty for running negative ads to a certain degree, which is you could become a lot of people's last choice. So how we help finding common ground is not for wishing for things that would be really nice and would be really powerful, but over which we have no control. The parties are incented to divide us. When you have a duopoly, the best way to compete is to make the other side, to make your side hate the other side. So one of my friends, Greg Orman, always says, we don't have, this many Republicans and this many Democrats. We have this many people who hate Democrats, and we have this many people who hate Republicans. Now, I know that's not always the case, but the fact is there's a lot of that. So I'm just going to tell you, I used to believe in hope and change. I mean, a lot, and I'm for those things. I'm for hope. I'm for all of that. But ruthlessly, you got to change the incentives of the industry. And then once our leaders are incented to find common ground, they will stop telling us that we have to hate each other, because they won't be incented to tell us that anymore. And we won't feel existentially that the whole world is going to be ruined if other people also have some say in our policies. And again, it's not utopia, still messy, hard democracy. It's just closer to where we need to go.
Yeah, very good. We've got quite a big list here. So let's go into a kind of a speed round, Katherine, if you will.
Okay.
From Dr. Alexander's class again, Logan. You're advocating for both open primaries and ranked choice voting, but some states like California only have one of these. If a ballot initiative was created in Ohio, but we could only get one of those done, which is more important, ranked choice generals or open primaries?
I'd probably do open primaries, but the fact is you don't have to choose. Even if you have single subject rules, you can just run 2 initiatives and your campaign can be vote yes on, ballot question number 1 and ballot question number 2. And I wouldn't contribute money and it won't be powerful enough to keep us from drowning. So then I'd just say, let's look at another state and try to find a place where we can make both happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I wouldn't vote for it and want you guys to win. If you did that, I would.
Good question, Logan. Okay, from Denise out of the 2021 all class, what advice for young dreamers who wants to change the world for the better going into the political arena?
Please go into politics, and even go into politics under the existing rules. Look, even under existing rules, great people can make great things happen. It's just you're swimming upstream. So when you go in, make a piece of what you're trying to do to change these rules so that you won't have to swim upstream forever, and neither will other people as well.
There's some debate about there's some conversation about voting systems in the news landscape. How would this then the result of it, where you're having extra details within the voting system, meaning the Dominion system, how have you tackled that?
Yeah, so almost all the current voting systems can calculate ranked choice voting ballots, so it's not a technological problem. There's no question opponents will say, oh my God, it's going to be manipulated, but it can't be manipulated more than just counting the ballots now. I mean, you'd have to go in and fraudulently change things in the software and the algorithms and everything, and so, or you'd have to, have fraud in the ballot box, whatever. All of those, whatever problems we have now wouldn't change because of this, but we have to solve those problems with the current system and get trust in our voting, and we'd have to address them here as well. It's just not harder.
Yeah, very good. What are your thoughts on publicly funded campaigns?
Again, I would be, in general, a huge fan of it. It's just not in the intersection of powerful and achievable, meaning you could right now, you can't get big money or corporate money out of politics without a constitutional amendment. For the reasons we're divided, we're not going to get that. So it's not in powerful and achievable. I would also argue that what you can do right now is match small dollar donations. But I would tell you that once people realize that the small dollar donations that are being matched are by engaged donors that they don't agree with, that enthusiasm for that particular reform will go away as well. The best thing is just change the incentives, reduce the return on investment of current self-interested money, and then wait for a time when we're not so divided such that we can get a constitutional amendment and try to look at our financing system from the big picture.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. For those of you that we've got about 5 minutes left. So if you had to leave, you can also visit Amazon and buy The Politics Industry by Katherine Gehl and check that out for sure. What role can high school educators play in this process?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that if high school educators, I'll tell you my own view is, I just thought sort of that everything was a given. And I thought that we were going to have great American democracy forever and ever based on my civics, that America had solved it and our founders had solved it and everything was up. And that's where I came out of it thinking my responsibility was to vote. But I just think it's helpful to have people understand that their responsibility is looking over the system and the incentives in the system itself. And again, that's not a partisan thing to say. And having people learn that talking about politics is actually a responsibility of citizenship, and that you can and should talk about it and not be afraid to. And I need to say one quick thing. Sylvie just put up 2 emails, mine and Brian Cannon's. So Brian Cannon, can you just wave on the screen? Brian Cannon is our director of campaigns. Anybody who wants to be involved in Ohio, please email Brian Cannon, bcannon at political-innovation.org ASAP, and he will be able to connect you to the nascent campaign in Ohio.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Going back to the questions. Okay. I would assume that this proposed election process would be used to choose, this is from Jonah and Dr. Alexander's class, to choose all elected officials, president, representatives, senators, et cetera. Is there a possibility that this involvement would require keeping track of candidates would deter some from participating?
Is it possible that this involvement would what?
deter some from participating as being part of the being part of the election process or being a candidate?
Well, first of all, Final Five voting, there's nothing that keeps it from being implemented for the federal delegations of Congress, as well as for state governments, depending on your state constitution. So there's nothing that keeps it from being implemented federally. There may be some things in different state constitutions, which would mean you couldn't do that in your state until you changed your constitution. I don't know about Ohio. You'd have to figure that out. We are really pushing to do Final Five voting for Congress only right now. Here's why. First of all, you can't do it for the presidency. That would take too long to respond right now. You can do it later in a different way, but you can't do it for the presidency. And the reason not to try to also do it for your legislature, although that's a decision for those of you in Ohio, is because you want to start with something where we all agree. And as I said in my speech, there's one thing in this country that everybody agrees on, almost, regardless of political persuasion, and that is that Congress is broken. So let's not fight about whether your state capital is broken or your governor is horrible or something. And we're not even in this case fighting about your specific representatives or senators. Congress as an institution is broken. Let's all agree to change those rules. And then later, I believe it will work so well that states can come back and change it for their own legislature. And will it deter people from voting? I mean, people can vote exactly how they vote now, choose one in the primary, choose one in the general. They can do more if they want to, which is rank more candidates. But I think actually it'll dramatically increase participation because it will all matter now. And because you're likely to have candidates that you're super excited about instead of, lesser of two evil candidates all the time.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give Dr. Alexander the last question. Before I do that, I just wanted to thank the mayor of our fine city, who has been the mayor, Mayor David Berger. You can wave your hand there to Catherine. And the mayor has he's since the Al Lima leadership was founded. The mayor has been the mayor of Lima, Ohio, and he's retiring as of this year. So this will be his last year. And you don't have to worry about top 5 ranking, Mayor. You're good. And I also wanted to thank Tony Wilkerson and Peggy Ahura, 2 council members in the city of Lima, for joining the broadcast today. Dr. Alexander, go ahead with the last question.
I want to thank Catherine and for a wonderful presentation. Yeah, it's fantastic. Matt for setting it up. I don't think I really have a question so much as just kind of a request for an action plan. So if folks are indeed interested in kind of making, the kinds of changes that you have advocated for, what should be their next steps?
They should email, and I'd like Brian Cannon to wave. Brian, can you wave? Okay, that's Brian Cannon. He is our director of campaigns at the Institute for Political Innovation. He is the person in touch with people in Ohio already who are doing the early work about putting a ballot initiative together. It's super early, it's startup phase. And so if you email Brian, then he would put you in touch with those people. These campaigns are run on a state-by-state basis. And then what should happen, it might be a little bit frustrating at first while political campaigns go, won't be super organized, it's not run by JP Morgan, people are going to come together and create a campaign around something they believe in, which is so exciting. And then you're going to work between now and November of 2022 to make sure that you have the votes. And when you watch in November of 2022, no matter what you feel about every candidate running, you will be watching and you will be so excited to see if you have achieved your victory in Ohio. And that is the thing. You get together and you put a campaign together from the start. But the good thing is we're going to help you and help the leaders, some of whom may be on this call. So just email Brian Cannon.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to squeeze
signatures ASAP.
I want to squeeze one last in from the class of 2020, Emily Kerber. Are there before and after comparisons, Catherine, of voting turnout in Alaska since it implemented the Final Four voting? So comparisons of the voter turnout in Alaska.
So there's none. So Alaska implemented it in November of 2020 in this last election, and there have been no elections since then.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Catherine, thank you and your staff. I'd like to thank Erica, my colleague from the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for your great work. incredible presentation. I really am thrilled to have you as our inaugural presenter for the Leaders Over Lunch. We're going to do this on a monthly and sometimes bi-monthly basis for Al Lima Leadership. There's no cost to this series, but donations on our website are greatly appreciated. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this, and we'll look forward to the next one. Dr. Alexander, to you and your class, all the best to you as you finish up in the next couple of months of this season and this semester. And Katherine, all the best to you. We'll certainly be watching you, and we'll keep in touch for sure.
I'll be watching you guys because I'm talk, Ohio is action. And thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dr. Alexander. And thank you, Doug Boquist, who looked interested the entire time. And I always try to find someone who looks really interested so I can think I'm doing okay. So thank you.
Yeah, he's a pastor, so he's praying for all of us for sure.
Well, it was interesting. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. All right, have a great day, everybody.
Bye, guys. Bye. See you at the rally.
Indeed.